The transmission came at 3 in the morning, Earth Standard Time. Commander Daniel Harper was sleeping in his quarters aboard the USS Retribution when the alarm pulled him from his dreams. He had been dreaming about his daughter, about the day she took her first steps. Now he was running through cold metal corridors toward the bridge. Lieutenant Nathan Cross was already there, his face pale in the blue light of the communication screens. He looked at Daniel with eyes that held something terrible. Daniel had served with Nathan for 7 years. He had never seen that look before. The message was, from New Haven, a colony world on the edge of human space. 200,000 people lived there. Families, children, scientists, and farmers, and teachers. Daniel had visited once, 3 years ago. He remembered green fields, and laughing children, and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Nathan played the transmission. At first, there was just static. Then came the screams. A woman's voice, breaking apart with terror, begging someone to help. The sound of explosions, children crying. A man shouting that they were everywhere, that they were killing everyone. Then the voice cut off, and there was nothing but silence. Daniel stood very still. His hands were shaking. He asked Nathan to trace the signal, to find out what happened. Nathan told him that the signal was gone. New Haven had stopped transmitting completely. 200,000 people had gone silent. Admiral Catherine Moore received the news at Earth Command. She was 63 years old and had served humanity for 4 decades. She had seen wars and disasters and terrible things. But when she watched the transmission from New Haven, she felt something cold settle in her chest. She knew what this meant. She knew who was responsible. The Velthari Dominion had signed a peace treaty with humanity 3 years ago. They were an insectoid species, tall and thin with black eyes and clicking mandibles. They had conquered 12 other species across the galaxy. They were cruel and proud, and they looked at humans the way a hunter looks at prey. But they had signed the treaty. They had promised peace. Catherine sent Nathan Cross and a reconnaissance team to New Haven. The journey took 4 days. 4 days of silence. 4 days of hoping that somehow, impossibly, the colony had survived. They found hell. Nathan's shuttle descended through clouds of smoke and ash. Below him, the city of New Haven was burning. Buildings had collapsed into rubble. Streets were filled with bodies. He could see them from the air. Thousands of shapes lying still in the roads, and parks, and playgrounds. He landed near the central plaza. His team spread out, weapons ready. But there was nothing to fight. The Velthari were gone. They had done their work, and left. Nathan walked through streets he did not recognize anymore. The shops where people had bought food and clothes were shattered ruins. The school where children had learned to read and count was a smoking crater. The hospital was destroyed. Its walls collapsed inward. Medical equipment scattered across the ground. He found the first mass grave behind the community center. Hundreds of bodies, piled together, covered in dirt. Men and women and children. Some of them were still holding hands. Nathan fell to his knees. He had trained for war. He had prepared himself for death. But this was not war. This was murder. This was the systematic destruction of innocent people who had done nothing wrong. He forced himself to stand. He activated his recording equipment and began to document everything. The galaxy needed to see this. Humanity needed to see this. His voice broke as he described what he found, but he kept talking. He owed the dead that much. Back on the Retribution, Daniel watched the footage in silence. His bridge crew stood around him, tears streaming down their faces. Lieutenant Ashley Grant had family on New Haven. Her sister, her brother-in-law, their 2 young daughters. She watched the screen with empty eyes, searching for faces she recognized among the dead. The footage reached Earth within hours. It spread across every human world, every station, every ship. 200,000 people had been murdered. Children had been killed in their beds. Families had been slaughtered while trying to flee. The Velthari had left messages scrawled on walls in human blood, mocking humanity for being weak. The United Nations Space Council convened an emergency session. Ambassador Ryan Clark stood before the delegates, his voice shaking with controlled fury. He played the footage for those who had not seen it. He read the names of the dead, thousands of names, until his voice gave out and another delegate took over. The session lasted 12 hours. There were speeches and arguments and tears. Some delegates wanted immediate military action. Others urged caution, worried about starting a war with the most powerful empire in the sector. But as the hours passed, something changed in the room. The grief transformed into something harder, something colder. Admiral Catherine Moore was called to testify. She told the council what she knew about Velthari military strength. She told them about the hidden fleet that humanity had built during the peace years, the ships that no one in the galaxy knew existed. She told them that humanity had always prepared for this day, even while hoping it would never come. The council voted at midnight. The decision was unanimous. Diplomatic channels with the Velthari Dominion were closed permanently. All treaties were void. Humanity would respond not with words, but with action. Catherine returned to her office and sat alone in the darkness. She thought about the children of New Haven, Asgas, about the families who had trusted humanity to protect them. She thought about what was coming, the violence and death that would follow. She had never wanted this. No one had wanted this. But the Velthari had made their choice. They had looked at humanity and seen weakness. They had killed innocent people because they believed no one would stop them. They were wrong. Catherine opened a secure channel to Station Omega, the hidden military base beyond Jupiter. She spoke only 3 words, but those words would change the galaxy forever. Wake the fleet. Across the Sol system, 500 warships began to stir. Crews who had waited years for this moment took their stations. Weapons that had never been fired, powered up with a low, hungry hum. And in the cold darkness of space, humanity prepared to show the galaxy what happened when you killed their children. The Velthari had wanted war. Now they would learn what that truly meant. Number. Part 2. The Assembly Watches. The Galactic Assembly met on a station at the center of known space. 43 species sent representatives to this place. A massive ring of metal and glass, floating among the stars. Here, the great powers of the galaxy debated and negotiated and pretended to be civilized. Ambassador Megan Carter arrived with her delegation 3 days after New Haven. She was 45 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair, and eyes that had seen too much in the past week. She had not slept since the news came. She could not close her eyes without seeing the footage, without hearing the screams. The assembly hall was enormous, a vast circular chamber with seats rising in tiers around a central platform. Representatives from dozens of species filled the room. Some were humanoid, others were utterly alien. Creatures of silicon and gas, and forms that defied easy description. They watched Megan as she walked to the human delegation's seats. They whispered among themselves. Counselor Zyrath of the Velthari Dominion was already present. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his exoskeleton gleaming black under the lights. His compound eyes reflected everything and revealed nothing. He stood with perfect stillness, surrounded by his guards, radiating confidence and contempt. The session began with the usual formalities. The presiding speaker, a being from a species so old they had forgotten their own homeworld, called for order. The matter before the assembly was the incident at New Haven Colony. Incident. Megan felt her hands clench. 200,000 dead. And they called it an incident. Zyrath spoke first. His voice was a series of clicks and hisses, translated by the assembly's systems into smooth, pleasant tones. He expressed regret for the unfortunate events at New Haven. He claimed that Velthari intelligence had discovered evidence of human military buildup on the colony. He said that New Haven was a secret base, a threat to Velthari security. He said his people had acted in preemptive self-defense. The assembly listened. Some delegates nodded. The Velthari had conquered 12 species. They were powerful and feared, and many in the room wanted to stay on their good side. Then it was Megan's turn. She walked to the central platform slowly. She carried a small device in her hand. She did not look at Xyrath. She looked at the assembly, at the representatives of 43 species who had gathered to discuss the murder of her people. She began to speak. Her voice was calm and clear and carried to every corner of the vast chamber. She told them about New Haven. She told them about the farms and the schools and the research stations. She told them about the families who had built new lives on a distant world. Then she activated the device. The footage played on every screen in the assembly hall. The burning city. The mass graves. The children lying dead in playgrounds. The messages, written in blood. The assembly watched in silence as the horror unfolded before them. Megan began reading names. The names of the dead. She started with the children, the youngest victims. She spoke each name clearly, giving weight to every syllable. She read for 10 minutes, then 20. And she was barely through the first 1,000 names. Some delegates looked away. Others wept. A few walked out, unable to bear any more. But most stayed, and watched, and listened. Finally, Megan stopped. She turned to face Xyrath directly. She told him that humanity had intercepted Velthari military communications. She played them for the assembly. The orders came directly from the Velthari High Command. The attack on New Haven was planned months in advance. There was no threat. There was no military base. The Velthari simply wanted to send a message to humanity, to show them their place. The assembly erupted. Delegates shouted at each other, at Xyrath, at the presiding speaker. Several species condemned the Velthari openly. The representative from the Keth Collective, a species that had barely survived Velthari conquest 2 centuries ago, stood and called Xyrath a murderer. Xyrath laughed. It was a terrible sound. A clicking rattle that silenced the chamber. He looked at the assembled species with open contempt. He said that the strong did as they pleased. He said that humans were weak, that they talked and debated while real powers acted. He said that the Velthari would continue to do as they wished, and no one would stop them. He looked directly at Megan. He asked what humanity would do. Would they talk? Would they write angry letters? Would they beg the assembly for help? Megan stared at him for a long moment. The chamber was completely silent. Every being in the room was watching her, waiting to see how humanity would respond. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but the assembly's systems carried her words to every ear. She told him that he had made a mistake, a terrible mistake that his people would pay for across generations. She told him that humanity had never sought war, not because they could not fight, but because they knew exactly what they were capable of. She told him that the Velthari had mistaken patience for weakness, had mistaken mercy for inability. She said that humanity would not be asking the assembly for help. They did not need it. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Her delegation followed in perfect silence. Their footsteps echoed in the vast chamber. Xyrath called after her. He asked where she was going. He mocked her, asked if she was running away. Megan stopped at the door. She turned back and looked at him one final time. She said that she was going home. She said that humanity had tried peace. They had tried diplomacy. They had extended their hand in friendship, and the Velthari had slapped it away. She said that now humanity would show the galaxy another side of themselves, a side they had hoped to never reveal. She said that Xyrath should enjoy his remaining time. She said it would not be long. Then she was gone. The assembly sat in stunned silence. Representatives whispered to each other, trying to understand what had just happened. The Velthari delegates laughed and joked among themselves, unconcerned. But some species in the room were older than others. Some had longer memories. They had watched humanity during the peace years, had studied them carefully. They had seen something in human eyes that troubled them, something they could not quite name. Those species did not laugh. They watched the door where Megan had disappeared, and they felt the first stirrings of fear. Something was coming, something terrible, and the galaxy would never be the same. Part 3. The Fleet Awakens. Beyond Mars, past the asteroid belt, in the shadow of Jupiter, where the sun was just another bright star, humanity had built something that no one in the galaxy knew existed. Station Omega was carved into a moon that had no name on any map. From the outside, it looked like dead rock, just another piece of debris floating in the endless dark. Inside was the largest military installation humanity had ever constructed. Admiral Catherine Moore arrived aboard a shuttle that left no trail. She had made this journey many times over the years, always in secret, always alone. Now she walked through corridors that hummed with new energy. The station was waking up. Commander Daniel Harper met her at the main hangar. He had changed since New Haven. The easy smile was gone from his face. His eyes were hard and focused and filled with cold purpose. Catherine understood. She felt the same. They walked together through the station, past crews running to their posts, past engineers checking systems that had been dormant for years. The hangar opened up before them, and Catherine stopped to take in the sight she had helped create. 500 warships filled the vast space. They hung in perfect rows, sleek and dark and deadly. These were not the exploration vessels that humanity showed to the galaxy. These were not the diplomatic cruisers and research ships that other species saw. These were weapons of pure destruction, designed for one purpose only. Catherine had overseen the construction herself. During the peace years, while humanity built colonies and reached out to other species, she had quietly assembled the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. She had hoped they would never need to use it. That hope had died on New Haven. Daniel walked to his ship, the USS Retribution. It was the largest vessel in the fleet, a dreadnought-class warship nearly 2 kilometers long. Its hull was covered in armor that could adapt to any weapon fired against it. Its guns could punch through shields that other species considered impenetrable. Its engines could cross the galaxy in days. His crew was waiting. Lieutenant Ashley Grant stood at her station, her face a mask of determination. She had confirmed the deaths of her sister and nieces 3 days ago. She had not cried. She had simply nodded and asked when they would be leaving. Commander Eric Sullivan was checking the weapons systems one final time. Katie Morris was in engineering, running diagnostics on engines that could tear holes in space. Catherine addressed the fleet over the general channel. Her voice reached every ship, every crew member, every soul who had gathered for this moment. She told them what had happened on New Haven. She told them about the children murdered in their beds, about the families slaughtered in the streets, about the Velthari laughing in the Galactic Assembly. She told them that humanity had always believed in peace. They had reached out to the stars, hoping to find friends, hoping to build something better than the wars and hatreds of old Earth. They had offered their hand to every species they met. They had signed treaties and made alliances and tried so hard to be good. And the Velthari had killed their children anyway. Catherine's voice hardened. She said that today, humanity would show the galaxy what they had been hiding. Not because they wanted to, but because the universe had given them no choice. She said that every crew member should remember New Haven. Remember the 200,000. Remember why they were here. She gave the order to power up. Across the fleet, engines roared to life. The sound was like thunder rolling through the station, like the voice of an angry god. Ships that had sat silent for years shook off their slumber and rose from their berths. Daniel stood on the bridge of the Retribution and watched his displays come alive. Weapons, systems online, shields at full power, navigation plotting courses to targets across Velthari space. His crew moved with quiet efficiency, each one focused on their task. Ashley turned from her station. She told him that targeting data was loaded. 47 primary targets across the Velthari Dominion. Every shipyard, every military base, every industrial center. Humanity had spent years mapping Velthari space, learning their weaknesses, finding the pressure points that would bring their empire crashing down. The Velthari thought they knew humanity. They thought humans were soft, peaceful, unwilling to fight. They had watched humanity build colonies and research stations and assumed that was all humans could do. They had no idea what was coming. Eric reported from his station. All weapons systems were functioning perfectly. The phase cannons were charged and ready. The quantum torpedoes were armed. The missile bays were full. The Retribution alone carried enough firepower to destroy a planet. Katie called from engineering. Engines were operating at peak efficiency. They could sustain combat speeds for weeks without refueling. The ship was ready. Daniel looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These were not bloodthirsty warriors eager for violence. These were scientists and engineers and explorers who had been forced into a war they did not want. They were grieving. They were angry. But they were also professional and disciplined and absolutely determined. The fleet formed up around the Retribution. 500 ships moving as one, their hulls gleaming in the faint light of distant Jupiter. They looked like a swarm of predators circling before the hunt. Catherine gave the final order. She did not make a speech. There was nothing left to say. She simply told them to go and do what needed to be done. The fleet jumped. In an instant, 500 ships vanished from human space, tearing through the fabric of reality toward distant stars. They moved faster than any Velthari sensor could track, traveling distances in seconds that would take other species days. The Velthari Dominion was celebrating. News of their victory at New Haven had spread across their empire. Their leaders were giving speeches about human weakness, about how easily the soft species had broken. They were planning more attacks, more conquests, more genocide. They had no warning. In 47 star systems across Velthari space, human warships emerged from faster-than-light travel simultaneously. They appeared like ghosts, like nightmares given form, like death itself descending from the stars. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity became when you killed their children. Part 4. The reckoning begins. The Velthari High Command did not understand what was happening. Their sensors showed enemy ships appearing across their space, but that was impossible. No species could coordinate an attack across 47 star systems simultaneously. No species had the technology for such precise, faster-than-light travel. No species would dare attack the Velthari Dominion at all. Then the shooting started. Commander Daniel Harper stood on the bridge of the Retribution as they emerged above Velthari Prime, the homeworld of the Dominion. The planet hung below them, a blue-green sphere covered in massive cities and orbital stations. Hundreds of Velthari warships moved to intercept, forming defensive lines around their precious capital. Daniel felt nothing. No fear, no hesitation, no doubt. He thought of New Haven. He thought of the children in the playgrounds. He gave the order to engage. The Retribution opened fire. Phase cannons lanced across the void. Brilliant beams of energy that struck Velthari shields and passed through them like they were made of paper. The first Velthari cruiser exploded before its crew understood they were under attack. The second followed a moment later. Then, the third. Ashley coordinated the targeting solutions from her station. Her hands moved across her console with mechanical precision, directing fire to each enemy vessel in turn. Every shot hit. Every target died. She had a picture of her sister's family taped to her display, 2 little girls with bright smiles who would never grow up. She did not look at the picture. She did not need to. She remembered. The Velthari fleet tried to respond. They had conquered 12 species with these ships, crushed civilizations that had stood for millennia, Their commanders were veterans of 100 battles, confident in their superiority. Their weapons bounced off human shields. Their most powerful cannons, the guns that had burned cities and shattered fleets, did nothing. The Retribution's adaptive armor analyzed each incoming attack and adjusted instantly, becoming immune to whatever had just struck it. Within minutes, the Velthari realized they could not hurt the human ships at all. Panic spread through their ranks. Ships that had never known retreat began to pull back. Commanders screamed for reinforcements that would never arrive, because those reinforcements were already burning in other star systems. Eric watched his weapons displays with grim satisfaction. The quantum torpedoes were working perfectly, tracking targets across thousands of kilometers, ignoring countermeasures, finding their marks with unerring accuracy. The Velthari had nothing that could match human technology. They had spent centuries conquering weaker species and had grown complacent. They had never faced an enemy that was truly their equal. Now they faced an enemy that was far, far beyond them. The battle above Velthari Prime lasted 17 minutes. When it was over, the Velthari defense fleet no longer existed. 342 warships reduced to drifting wreckage. Not a single human vessel was damaged. The Velthari High Command sent a transmission requesting negotiation. They offered to discuss terms. They said there had been a terrible misunderstanding about New Haven. They said they were willing to pay reparations. Admiral Catherine Moore's response was broadcast on every frequency across Velthari space. Her voice was cold and flat and utterly without mercy. She said there would be no negotiation. She said humanity had tried that and received only dead children in return. She said the Velthari had wanted to see what humans did without restraint. Now, they would watch. The fleet did not destroy Velthari Prime. Daniel had specific orders about that. They were not here to commit genocide. They were not here to become the monsters they were fighting. They were here to break the Velthari dominion so completely that it could never threaten anyone again. The Retribution turned its guns on the orbital stations surrounding the planet. Shipyards that had built warships for centuries were reduced to rubble. Military bases were torn apart. Industrial facilities that produced weapons and armor were systematically destroyed. The planet itself was untouched, but everything around it burned. When they were finished, Velthari Prime was alone. No stations. No defenses. No way to reach the rest of their empire. The most powerful world in the Dominion had been reduced to an isolated rock in hours. Then the fleet moved on. Across Velthari space, the same scene repeated. Human ships appeared, destroyed military and industrial targets with terrifying efficiency, and vanished. They did not occupy territory. They did not demand surrender. They simply dismantled everything the Velthari needed to wage war. Katie monitored the engine systems as the Retribution jumped from system to system. They had been designed for exactly this kind of campaign, capable of sustained operations for weeks without rest. The ship performed flawlessly. The crew performed flawlessly. They were machines of war now, doing the terrible work that needed to be done. The Galactic Assembly watched in stunned silence. Reports came in from observers across Velthari space, documenting the scale of the destruction. Species that had trembled before the Dominion for centuries saw their conquerors brought low in days. Some were horrified by human brutality. Others were relieved. Many were simply afraid, realizing for the first time that humanity had been hiding capabilities beyond anything the galaxy had imagined. The Keth Collective, survivors of Velthari conquest 200 years ago, sent a message to Earth. They offered thanks. They offered alliance. They said they had waited generations for someone to stand against the Dominion. Other species followed. The 12 civilizations conquered by the Velthari rose up, seizing the moment to reclaim their freedom. With the Dominion's military shattered, there was no one to stop them. Daniel stood on his bridge as they completed their final target run. The main Velthari shipyard, the largest military construction facility in the sector, collapsed into a ball of fire and debris. 3 weeks had passed since New Haven. In that time, Humanity had done what no species had accomplished in 500 years. The Velthari dominion was broken. Daniel felt no joy, no triumph. He felt only exhaustion and a deep, aching sadness. This was not what humanity wanted. This was not who they wanted to be. But the Velthari had given them no choice. He looked at his crew, at Ashley and Eric and Katie and all the others who had served with such dedication. They had done their duty. They had protected their people. Now they had to live with what they had become. The fleet regrouped in Velthari space, 500 ships floating among the wreckage of an empire. They waited for orders, for the next phase of the operation. But there was no next phase. The war was already over. The Velthari just did not know it yet. Part 5. The New Order. 6 months had passed since New Haven. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Velthari Dominion, once the most feared power in known space, existed now only as a collection of broken worlds, connected by nothing but shared shame. Counselor Xyrath stood before the Galactic Assembly again. But everything was different now. He no longer stood tall and proud, surrounded by guards, radiating contempt. His exoskeleton had dulled to a tired gray. His compound eyes were empty. He stood alone at the central platform, a representative of a nation that had lost everything. The assembly hall was full. Every species had sent observers to witness this moment. They filled the tiers of seats, watching in silence as history unfolded before them. Ambassador Megan Carter entered through the main doors. She walked slowly to the human delegation's seats, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. She looked older than she had 6 months ago. The weight of everything that had happened showed in her face, in the gray that had spread through her hair, in the shadows under her eyes. But her voice was strong when she spoke. She presented humanity's terms for ending the conflict. The Velthari would surrender all remaining military assets. Every warship, every weapon, every piece of military technology would be destroyed or handed over to an international oversight body. They would pay reparations to every species they had wronged during their centuries of conquest. They would release all subject worlds and populations immediately. And every leader who had authorized the genocide at New Haven would stand trial for crimes against sentient life. The terms were harsh. They were meant to be. Xyrath listened without expression. When Megan finished, he remained silent for a long moment. Then, he spoke. He called the terms excessive. He said humanity had already destroyed the Dominion's ability to wage war. He said demanding trials was barbaric, a violation of Velthari sovereignty. He said that civilized species did not treat defeated enemies this way. Megan looked at him. Her face did not change. Her voice remained calm. She reminded him of New Haven. She said that the Velthari had killed 200,000 innocent people, men and women and children who had done nothing wrong, who had posed no threat, who had simply wanted to live their lives in peace. She said that humanity had destroyed the Dominion's military and industrial capacity, but had not killed a single Velthari civilian. Not one. She asked him which behavior seemed more barbaric. Xyrath had no answer. The assembly watched as he stood there, silent and defeated. Species that had trembled before the Dominion for centuries saw their former masters brought low. Some felt satisfaction. Others felt only relief that the nightmare was finally ending. Xyrath signed the surrender documents. His hand shook as he made his mark. When he was finished, he turned and walked out of the chamber without looking back. He would stand trial 3 months later and spend the rest of his life in a prison cell, surrounded by images of the children he had ordered killed. As the session ended, representatives from a dozen species approached Megan. They wanted to understand. They wanted to know why humanity had hidden their true strength for so long. They wanted to know why humans had pretended to be weak, had acted as diplomats and peacekeepers when they could have dominated the galaxy. Megan told them the truth. She said that humanity had never pretended. Everything they had shown, the galaxy was real. Humans were builders and explorers and dreamers. They reached out to the stars, hoping to find wonder and friendship. They believed in peace because they had seen too much war on their own world and wanted something better. But humans were also survivors. They had clawed their way up from nothing on a harsh planet, fighting predators and disease and each other for every inch of progress. They carried that history in their blood, in their bones, in the deepest parts of their souls. When threatened, when their children were in danger, something ancient woke up inside them, something terrible. She said humanity had hoped never to show that side of themselves. They had built the fleet and trained the crews and developed the weapons, but they had prayed they would never need to use them. They wanted to be the species that brought peace to the galaxy, not the species that burned it down. The Velthari had given them no choice. Commander Daniel Harper returned to Earth as a hero. Crowds gathered to cheer the fleet as it entered the Sol system. Politicians gave speeches praising the brave men and women who had defended humanity. There were parades and medals and celebrations across every human world. Daniel attended none of them. He went instead to New Haven. The colony was still in ruins, but work had begun to rebuild. A memorial was being constructed at the center of the main plaza, a wall of black stone where every name of the dead would be carved. 200,000 names. It would take years to complete. Admiral Catherine Moore found him standing before the memorial wall. She had retired from active duty the week before, her work finished. She looked tired, but at peace. She asked him how he was doing. Daniel did not answer for a long time. He watched workers carefully etching names into the stone. Children's names, family names, the names of people who had simply wanted to build a new life on a distant world. He told Catherine that he did not know. He said he was proud of his crew, proud that they had protected humanity, proud that they had stopped the Velthari from ever hurting anyone again. But he also felt empty, hollow, like something inside him had burned away during the campaign and would never grow back. Catherine nodded. She understood. She felt the same way. She told him that this was the price of what they had done. They had saved humanity, but they had lost something in the process. Some innocence, some belief in their own goodness. They would carry that weight for the rest of their lives. But she also told him that the weight was worth carrying. Because of what they had done, human children would grow up safe. Families would build new colonies. Without fear, humanity would continue to reach for the stars, to explore and discover and create. That was worth any price. The fleet returned to cold storage beneath Jupiter's shadow. The weapons were powered down. The crews went home to their families. Humanity went back to building colony ships and research stations, to diplomacy and cooperation with the species that shared their galaxy. But the galaxy remembered. They remembered the footage from New Haven, the horror that had started everything. They remembered the human fleet appearing across 47 star systems, simultaneously, impossible and unstoppable. They remembered the Velthari dominion falling in weeks after ruling for centuries. They remembered what happened when humans stopped being civilized. 10 years later, a new species made contact with humanity. They were young and aggressive and eager to prove themselves. Their leaders looked at human colony worlds and saw easy targets, soft people to conquer and exploit. Their elders stopped them. They showed the young leaders the historical records, the footage of what humanity had done to the Velthari. They explained that humans were not what they appeared to be. They were kind and generous and peaceful, yes, but they were also something else, something that should never be awakened. The young leaders watched the recordings in silence. They saw the fleet. They saw the destruction. They saw humanity without its mask. They chose peace. And so it went, across the centuries. Humanity continued to be the diplomats of the galaxy, the builders and dreamers and peacekeepers they had always wanted to be. They helped young species find their way. They mediated conflicts between ancient rivals. They reached out with open hands and warm hearts. But everyone remembered. Deep in the archives of every spacefaring civilization, the records waited. The story of New Haven, the story of the fleet, the story of what humanity became when you killed their children. No one ever threatened a human colony again.